This is Dennis Ramundi. I'm here with my co-host, Phil Goldberg. Our podcast, Spirit Matters, found at spiritmatterstalk.com. Our guest today, Father James J. Martin. He is a Jesuit priest, writer, and editor-at-large of the Jesuit magazine, America. In 2017, Pope Francis appointed Martin as the consultant to the Vatican Secretariat for Communications. You've seen him on the Colbert Show. He's all over the media, very popular, very interesting. We're very excited to have him. And his latest book, Learning to Pray, which will be coming out in February 2021. This is being recorded in January 2021. So welcome to the show. And again, thank you so much for taking the time to come on.
My pleasure. Good to be with both of you.
Father Martin, I was intrigued to discover that you had a career in finance and working for General Electric for some years before turning to the priesthood. And I'm always curious when I hear that sort of thing about how you had that sense of calling, what it was like, and what the decision was like. Can you?
Yeah, sure. So as you say, I went to the Wharton School as an undergrad, and then I worked for General Electric for 6 years in corporate finance and then in human resources. And basically, I wasn't very happy. I felt like the proverbial square peg in a round hole. And I came home one night and saw a documentary about Thomas Merton, the Trappist monk, who I know both of you know. And his life just seemed so interesting and compelling that I went out and read his book, and I sort of found within myself this desire for, what's called religious life in a religious order, which is really how a call starts. I mean, desire, you're interested in it, you're attracted to it. So that's how it happened. It was thanks to, I always say my vocation came from television, thanks to TV.
Father, the Jesuit order is a very scholarly order, and they also tend to be those in the church that are most liberal. And Pope Francis, our current Pope, is the first, as I understand, the Jesuit priest is the first Pope rather from the Americas. He's the first Pope since I think the 9th century that is not from Europe. So, and I know you had the opportunity to meet with him in the last couple of years. Tell us about maybe a few words on the Jesuit order and your meeting with the Pope.
Yeah, sure. He is the joke among the Jesuits is he is the first and last Jesuit Pope. Yeah, so the Jesuits are a religious order, which means we are a group of men. There are women religious orders. We take vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. We live in community. I think in the States, we're mostly known for our educational institutions. So Boston College, Georgetown, Fordham, any college named Loyola. We were founded, by St. Ignatius Loyola. It's education, but also lots of different kinds of work and pastoral work, social justice. And he's the first Jesuit. I think, the joke is that they forgot they were electing a Jesuit. Because he comes from a religious order. He comes from outside of the kind of diocesan model, so he just comes at things differently. He has a different, as we say in the Jesuits, way of proceeding.
That's fascinating. You mentioned Merton as a big influence in your life. Were not a lot of Catholics that, in my experience, don't know Merton. And certainly don't know the long history of other what we call Christian mystics that he's a contemporary version of. Were you interested in the other Christian mystics and in the contemplative life prior to your calling?
No, not at all. If you had said to me, name a Christian mystic before I entered, I wouldn't have known what to say.
Yeah.
No, I really didn't, I didn't grow up very religious. I'm Catholic and my parents were good people and Catholic, but I went to a public elementary school, public junior high, public high school. I went to the University of Pennsylvania, which is certainly not Catholic, and Wharton is certainly not Catholic. And so I knew very little, but to your point, I think it's a good point. Very few people the Christian mysticism and the history of Christian mysticism, and even someone as famous as Thomas Merton is not as well known as, Merton would have been certainly in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. So yeah, I was a novice, to coin a phrase, to that tradition.
Father, you are known for having reached out to the LGBT community very much and showing great compassion for them. Some in the church have celebrated you for doing that, and some in the church have been very critical of you.
Mm-hmm.
Where did the Pope stand on that when you interacted with him? And also, where do you think the church needs to go with this?
Yeah. So I'm actually, I met with the Pope for a half an hour in September of 2019. It was a real high point of my life. He asked me not to talk about what we discussed, but what I can say is this. I can certainly say this. We talked for a half an hour about LGBT Catholics. That's what we talked about. And his invitation to me was in the Apostolic Palace, where he meets presidents and diplomats. They put a picture out. They put it on his schedule. So it was clear, for people who read Vatican tea leaves, what he was trying to do, which was, I think I can say, show his support for the ministry. Where should and it was a very warm conversation. He was very open and listened, and yeah, it was really great. A high point for me. Where should the church go? The first step is for the church to listen to the experiences of LGBTQ Catholics. Just listen to them and treat them with what the catechism asks, which is respect, compassion, and sensitivity, and with what the gospel asks, that Jesus asks, which is love and mercy and compassion. So the first step is just to listen to them and to treat them with this dignity. We're not even there yet. I mean, there's so many people, if you go online and look at a lot of Catholic websites who, as you said, who even are attacking me for, I'm not challenging any church teaching, for even suggesting that people listen to this group of people. So I think the Pope has really made some great strides, and I think the church has as well. So we're moving ahead. Sometimes it's 2 steps back, 2 steps forward, 1 step backward, though.
And you specified LGBTQ Catholics. That would include the clergy.
Yeah.
And is that would that require something different?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a very complicated question. So, for people who might say, well, what does that mean? I mean, so Catholic members of religious order, we take a vow of chastity. Catholic diocesan priests make a promise of celibacy. It's essentially the same thing. Women in religious orders take chastity. So it doesn't mean that they're breaking their vows or they're sexually active or they're getting married. It just means that they're homosexually oriented or bisexual or whatever, and they're in religious orders and they're in the priesthood. That's always been the case. I know probably dozens of gay priests, who are faithful to their vows, and lesbian sisters. The problem is, because it really is a good question, why don't we know more about them? Well, oftentimes their bishops or their religious superiors don't want them to talk about it. They're not interested in having them talk about it. They're afraid of it. They're afraid for them, right? What might happen to them. So it's frustrating, because I think if that were more widely known, so some people feel it's scandalous, but they're living faithful lives. If that were more widely known, I think people would have a greater sense of where that is in the church. And I think, for example, young LGBT people might be able to say, oh, look, here's this role model that I know, or this teacher or this pastor, but that's not happening, unfortunately.
One last question on the LGBT issue from my side, and that is the Catholic Church educates a lot of kids. My brother went to a Jesuit prep school in Jersey City. Is there an official guideline in terms of discussing LGBT issues amongst Catholic educators, especially those that educate high school kids?
That's a great question, and nice shout out to St. Peter's Prep over in Jersey City. It varies from diocese to diocese and school to school. Some, I do a lot of speaking, actually more speaking since the pandemic, because I can do it via Zoom with Catholic high schools and colleges. And some schools are incredibly open. They have gay straight alliances or LGBT groups, and some schools, nothing, and it's forbidden, right? I met a woman about 3 years ago now who told me that she went to a Catholic girls' school. And so this was like 3 years ago. And the sister who was in charge said, in response to her question about whether or not she could, start a gay straight alliance, no, we don't need that, because there are no lesbian girls here. There were 600 girls in the school. So that's that. So it depends on where you are, which is unfortunate.
Father, you've become, you said your calling began with TV, and here you are on TV a lot, and you're a familiar face for many people. I'm guessing that one doesn't enter the clergy to become a TV star.
No, one does not. One should not. Let's put it that way.
And so I'm guessing this just sort of happened because of you writing books and stuff, and I suppose you got invitations. I'm curious what it was like to suddenly discover you're a recognizable personality, and how other people in the church responded.
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I work, so as I was saying, I'm a Jesuit priest, and after I was ordained, I was assigned by my Jesuit superiors to America magazine. So I write books, and gradually, you get phone calls from people. Would you comment on this? Would you comment on that? And someone said to me once, if you're not insane and return their phone calls, you stay on the Rolodex, or what used to be Rolodex. So it happened kind of gradually. Yeah, I recognizable. I'm not the kind of person that, well, if I'm in my collar, sometimes people will say hello, but it's not, I don't get mobbed going down the street. And if I'm not in my collar, I mean, no one pays me any attention, which is good. Yeah, I think the people that would be happy with what I'm doing are generally the people that are happy with what I'm saying. Right. And so that goes for lay people and priests and bishops. The people that are not happy with what I'm saying, and which I never quite understand, because I try to be really thoughtful and,
I would say the best, you are the best known priest, lay, priest in America since Bishop Fulton Sheen.
Well,
Who was
yeah,
on back, and that shows how old I am. I wanted to ask
he had
you.
He had a lot better clothes too.
Yes,
that I remember in a Blackboard
Yeah,
talk, and it was
right.
I wanted to ask you about your book, Learning to Pray.
Mm-hmm.
I think the title sort of indicates that probably it's a book about prayer, but tell us about it. And
Yeah,
it's reading it.
Yeah, thank you. It's an introduction to prayer, and it really is, the subtitle says it. It's a guide for everyone. So it's from people who have never prayed before, even a doubtful skeptic, to people who pray every day, go on retreats. What I really wanted to do was demystify it in a good way, because most people think I'm not praying well because nothing's happening, or it's boring, or it's dry, or I don't know what's supposed to happen, and they compare themselves to other people. And one of the things I really wanted to focus on in the book is what actually happens when you pray. You read, I'm sure you guys know, you read these spiritual books, and it's like, well, when you feel the presence of God, or you feel God's gentle touch. And most people say, what are you talking about? Like, what does that mean? Am I supposed to hear voices or visions, or what does that mean? So I try to unpack that in terms of what actually happens to people when they pray, and what can happen, and also to look at things like dryness and distraction. So, and to talk about different practices in prayer. So it's a very how-to book. I hope it's very accessible for people.
While we're on that, I know there's many different kinds of prayer,
Mm-hmm.
and every spiritual tradition has its forms. Do you go into the different types of prayer? Because most people think of prayer as just asking for something.
Yeah, definitely. I go into imaginative prayer, centering prayer, what's called Lectio Divina, where you use scripture, nature prayer, journaling, the examination of conscience. Yeah, you're right. And at the beginning of the book, I say that, there's nothing wrong with asking for things. I mean, you look at the Psalms, and the Old Testament, the New Testament, I actually have to sort of put up a defense for petitionary prayer, because people say, oh, that's very elementary. I mean, read the Psalms. They're asking for stuff, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's human, it's natural. But one of the points of the book, which is not new to the book, is that if that's all your prayer is, it's a little one-sided, right? If you're not kind of listening and noticing where God is, I use the example of a friendship. It's a good analogy. If all you did was, it's fine to ask your friends for favors. Would you help me with this? I need some advice. If all you did with your friends, all you did was ask them for things, you would start to say it's a little bit of a strange relationship.
You would lose the friends.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, fortunately, God's a little more faithful, but it's it needs to be kind of a two-way street. It needs to be more of a conversation. You need to be open to listening too, instead of when I was little, it was like God was this big sort of cosmic gumball machine. You just put in the right prayer and hopefully something would come out.
Yeah.
Father, I wanted to go back to your decision to go into the priesthood and how I read you were influenced by, I think, a film or you saw of Thomas Merton.
Mhm.
What was there anything particular that he said or you saw or you felt that got you thinking in that direction?
That's another great question. It was more just the look on his face and the
Mm.
environment of the monastery, right? I know you guys are familiar with monastic life. I think part of it was I was so stressed at my job at GE. I was so lost. I felt so sort of stressed, and I was having sort of stress related illnesses. I thought, oh my gosh, this looks so beautiful. There was a kind of romance to it, and which is fine. I mean, when I entered religious life, I found, it's like it's like a honeymoon, right? I mean, that you can't sort of sustain that. But that initial draw was the kind of romance of the monastic life. The irony is, I mean, I didn't, I know many Trappists, and I think I'd last about 4 days, but
Right.
it was the beautiful romance of that attracted me.
That's interesting. Were you shocked at the discipline?
In the monastery.
Yeah.
Yeah, I sort of, it's interesting. Obviously I'd read Merton and I'd read about different monastic rules. I actually found it really beautiful. I found it really, there's a rhythm to the day. I didn't mind getting up super early or going to bed super early. I think the thing that surprised me, this is pretty funny, a little true confession. I was at the Abbey of Gethsemane in Kentucky, which is Merton's Abbey.
Merton's
And
Abbey, yeah.
yeah, it's beautiful, by the way. The food's great. It's gorgeous. It was hot as hell, because it was Kentucky in the summer. And I remember they pray, I'm probably going to get this wrong, say 7 times a day with mass. And it's a lot of prayer. And, usually the prayers are maybe 15, 20 minutes. So I was praying with them, say after lunch, maybe 1 o'clock. And I was taking a walk in the fields and I heard the bells ring, 2 hours later. And I remember saying to myself, didn't we just pray? I just prayed. What are you talking about? So there was, and I'm also, I have what we call, in the trade, I have more of an active vocation. And I came back and I said to my spiritual director, I felt guilty. I felt guilty that he said, that's not your vocation. Why should you feel guilty? That's not what you're called to.
You're the second graduate of Gethsemane that we've had on the program. So I'll refer our listeners to our interview with James Finley, who actually knew Merton.
Yeah.
He's
terrific.
To go back to, go ahead, Dennis.
Yeah, you've been at it for a while now as a priest. Your audience is when you give a talk, if you give a sermon at Mass, has the audience changed much? Have the interests and questions and priorities of the lay people that you counsel, has that changed much?
It has. And I mean, I don't mean to get too political, but I think over the last 4 years, there's been a lot more emphasis in questions about political things. And certainly the election was something people were really struggling with. And I wrote an article in America recently called How Catholic Leaders Helped Give Rise to the Violence at the Capitol. And one of the impeti, I guess, for this article was that I was receiving through my public Facebook page so many pleas really from people saying, my pastor tells me I'm going to hell for voting for Joe Biden and I don't know what to do. And so, that was a really important thing to address, but that's come up a lot in the last couple of months.
Can I ask you to elaborate on that? Because I just discovered your article this morning and didn't have time to read it. What did you actually say? And the article appears in America, the Jesuit review for people, and you can see it online for our listeners. And
well,
we should say, excuse me, Father, but we should say we're recording this a week after the uprising in the insurrection, I should say, in the Capitol. It won't air for a few weeks, but it will still be on people's minds. And so what exactly did you say?
Well, I looked at the great number of priests and even bishops who were using very dualistic language, which is not part of Catholic teaching. I just want to very briefly, Catholic teaching says that there are lots of different moral questions that people need to look at, including abortion, which the church, focuses on. But there are a lot of other questions, and that a person should use his or her conscience, right, to determine, the who you vote for. Unfortunately, a lot of priests and even some bishops were telling people, no, it's a sin to vote for the Democrats, and that is simply not done in the Catholic Church. So I looked at the priests and bishops who did that, and I looked at also, unfortunately, a lot of personal vilification. Calling Biden names and bad Catholic, evil, a walking, talking scandal. Really, that was really frustrating for a lot of Catholics to hear, because again, Pope Francis, I think, said probably the most eloquent sum up of this is that the church is meant to form consciences, not to replace them. And so that's what the article was about, and how that led to this environment where, you saw all these Christian symbols at the Capitol because people thought they were doing something religious, because they thought they were fighting against evil, right? Which is really was really terrible. And that the other big irony is that a lot of these priests who consider themselves pro-life, right, led to an environment that caused people's death.
Father, I wanted to ask you also your relationship to Colbert. I've seen you on the show. I watch his. I enjoy his show. I enjoy you on it, and I'm wondering what the reaction, what feedback you got from fellow clergy when you appeared and when you continue to appear on his show.
Oh, when I was on the show. Yeah, I think people, again, if you like what I have to say, people are generally happy to see me on TV. If they don't like what I have to say, they're not happy to see me on TV. Things have become so polarized. And I didn't really, thanks to this LGBT book and this LGBT ministry, I never set out to do controversial ministry, but I got a note from someone yesterday saying that some right-wing Catholic organization is using your name to raise money, right? Like you fight against this person and this terrible person. So it's a strange thing to become. It really is a very strange thing to become this kind of polarizing figure. And I'm not a kind of controversialist, and that's the last thing I would want to do. But yeah, so if you like what I say, you're happy to see me on Colbert. If you don't like what I say, you're probably infuriated.
So it's interesting when people outside of a spiritual institution get wind of factionalism within a tradition, and we all know there are right-wing Catholics and progressive Catholics, and I'm guessing that within a diocese or within an order, there would be a lot of difference. And does it get heated? Does it get, especially when you touch on socio-political issues?
That's another good question. Not as much as you would think. So, for example, in the Jesuits, I always say the Jesuits include Cardinal Avery Dulles, who was quite conservative. That's one of the reasons he was made a cardinal, a great theologian, and Father Daniel Berrigan, the great, peace and justice advocate. They were, and they got along. Dan and Avery got along. I'm not sure if they ever lived in community, but in general, I think what happens is that we have a history of living together. We are focused on Jesus and the Gospels, and there's a real focus on that and on community. I also think people are pretty smart. In other words, they don't they don't bring up things in community that they know are going to infuriate people. That doesn't mean there aren't disputes and that people don't disagree with one another, but no, it's much worse, I would say, in, for example, parishes or in a diocese where they're really people aren't forced to kind of reconcile. It can be really difficult in parishes, particularly where a priest, or in the case of a diocese, a bishop, is kind of black and white thinking. If you're a priest and you say that anyone who's voting Democrat is going to hell, you're going to alienate, depending on where you are, probably half your parish, which is really unfortunate.
Dennis, can I follow up on that?
Yeah, and then I have one last question. How much time do we have left, Phil?
Oh, we have a few minutes, about 4 or 5. when it's become obvious if you look at the political landscape that a lot of the sort of right-wing Catholic folks have more, they're in alignment with a lot of the evangelical Protestants when it comes to political activism, and they seem to have more in common, at least their public facing sides of them. What does that do within an institution or within a religious order when there's historically tension between Catholics and Protestants, and now you have these strange bedfellows?
Oh, yeah.
In ways.
Yeah, no, there's a lot more tension within the church. You're absolutely right. I think you also see, so what happens is it becomes more political than religious, and you see people who they're happy to, for example, set aside the church's teaching on the death penalty, right? Oh, I don't believe in that. Well, then how are you pro-life? If you're in favor of life for the child in the womb, why not for the inmate on death row? Oh, well, I don't have to think about that. And you could say the same thing with Catholics on the left too. Say, I don't have to think about the child in the womb. So it becomes more political. But I think what's happened in the Catholic Church, which is unfortunate, is that there has been this alliance, I would say this rather unholy alliance between the anti-Francis forces and the pro-Trump forces.
Oh my.
And it's all the same people. So you see the same websites, the same commentators. You see secular organizations picking up on Catholic people who are it's basically anti-Francis, pro-Trump. And it becomes more political, and we are, look, I vote and I have political ideas, but we're supposed to refrain from that kind of active sort of campaigning and electioneering.
What a strange world that there's a dichotomy between Donald Trump and the Pope.
Yeah.
That's the world we live in. Father, thank you so very much for taking the time to come on. And I want to say again, the name of the book, that'll be out February 2021, is Learning to Pray. I don't know if you timed it this way, but certainly a lot of people I know have been talking about during the pandemic. I wish I had knew how to pray or meditate or do something spiritual. And so I think the timing on it is very good. And we look forward to it coming out.
Thanks. Yes, and thanks for having me on the show.
Well, we have a couple of minutes, if you don't mind. I want to ask you what you would leave our audience with respect to the instructive part of your book in how to pray. I think a lot of people hear the word pray and they say, oh, that's not for me, but they're not aware of the variety of methods. I always quote Meister Eckhart, who said, if the only prayer you ever use is thank you, it will be enough, or something like that.
That's correct. And I say in my book, if we did that, my book would have been a lot shorter. Yeah, so I think the main thing to say is that everyone can pray. It is accessible to everyone, and everyone who has a desire to, or more deeply, I would say that the desire to pray really comes from God. It's one way that God has of calling us, to be closer to God, whoever we are. And that there are many different ways of praying. There's no right way to pray. There's no wrong way to pray. Whatever brings you closer to God is prayer. But I think, the key, as I was saying before, is just understanding what happens when you pray. Because people, they sit down, they close their eyes, nothing happens, and they feel like, oh, I'm a failure, I can't pray. Well, they need to know a couple things to be more attentive to what is happening, right? And also to know that there are some dry periods. I mean, I go through dry periods myself. Thomas Merton went through dry periods. Thomas Merton, a great quote. He got distracted. He said, anyone who has never been distracted in prayer is not really praying. So to be open to the different ways of prayer, and to know that, this is the first line of my book, everyone can pray.
Including atheists?
Well, I do think that you have to believe in God to pray, but I would say agnostics, people who are seeking, and I know a lot of people who I basically meet and they say, oh, I don't believe in God. God's never involved in my life. Once you get them to start noticing and to say, gee, did you ever consider this as one way of God has of speaking to you? That kind of opens them up a little bit. But I do think you do have to give God the benefit of the doubt.
And what about how one conceives of God? I mean, I know a lot of people who will say I'm an atheist because they don't believe in, the Charlton Heston version of God. But when you redefine it, things change.
Right. Right, and another great point. So I often say to people, you know, whose God is it? Is this the God that you've been taught, or the judgmental God? The as one of my friends said memorably, the God who's a parole officer, right? Who's always looking for an infraction. You've already done something wrong. Or is it the God that you really encounter, not only in Scripture but in your life, right? The God of calm, the God of peace. So yeah, it is. It's helping people to see God in a new way, which helps them imagine God and then relate to God in a new way.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate your time and the work you're doing. And thanks for speaking out as you do from our perspective for the right things. and and we hope you can come back sometime.
I'd love that. Thank you, and keep up the great work.
Thank you so
Okay.
much, Father.
My pleasure.
Listeners, the book is Learning to Pray, Dr. James, Father James Martin. It will be out in February. Take good care.
Look forward to it. Thank you so much. Phil, that was Father James Martin. Boy, what a delightful guest, bright.
Yeah.
Not, you know, I would say there aren't a lot of priests, there aren't a lot of clergy in any religion that are as engaging as him. I would say he's a tremendous communicator. Again, I want to mention his book, Learning to Pray, by James Martin, coming out February 2021. And, you know, it may not seem like such a bold thing to do to speak out on behalf of the LGBT community within the Catholic Church, but having grown up Catholic, it was unthinkable back then, unfortunately. And a lot of people in that community, LGBT community, suffered as a result. But at least now I think they're making some headway, and it sounds like Pope Francis is much more open than some of the other popes and clergy we've had in the past. So yeah, total delight interviewing him.
No, I mean, we all know gay people who suffered a lot of, you know, having to keep secrets in the past and recrimination of various kinds. But I guess if you grow up Catholic, there's also this, you know, going to hell thing hanging over your head as a young person. That must be very, very difficult to do.
No, I think it's damaged a lot of people, and it wasn't only like gay people having to keep secrets; it was actually them being persecuted and harsh.
Yeah.
But hopefully, the things evolve, things change, things move forward. He was very inspiring. His book sounds very interesting. But the other thing I wanted to mention, Phil, was for those not familiar with the Jesuit order of Catholic priests, I don't think there's a women's version of the Jesuits. Maybe there is. But in any event, they're very, very scholarly. It's the equivalent of getting a PhD. It's way more book learning. It's way more scholarship than the average priest. And the average priest has to go through a lot of, you know, academic training as well. But this is quite, and that's why there have been so many influential and better known Jesuits.
Yes, and I discovered, you know, not having grown up Catholic, I thought they were all the same. And, you know, later in life, I realized there's different orders of within the church. And it turns out that, you know, the Jesuits have been, you know, they've made tremendous contributions with respect to education and
science.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I've, you know, given a lot of talks and at Loyola Marymount here in LA. In fact, we recently had Christopher Chappell on again on the show, and you know, he teaches at Loyola Marymount and started the first yoga studies master's degree program in the country at a Jesuit or institution, which is, I found fascinating, you know, that they seem to be much more open-minded and much broader in their scope of interest.
Right. You know, it's one thing that's changed a lot in Jesuit education, colleges and high school, especially, is when my brother back in the early 60s went to a Jesuit prep school in he mentioned St. Peter's in Jersey City. At least half the teachers in the school, I believe, were Jesuits. Not a lot of people are becoming priests or nuns anymore. And if you look at Jesuit high schools now, and I don't know about colleges, I would think it's the same. Maybe the principal is a Jesuit, maybe there's one Jesuit teacher, but it's mostly lay teachers. So that affects things as well. And, in some ways, the Catholic Church, as I see it in America, has what I would consider to be gone through a process of evolution, more open-mindedness and all. On the other hand, there's a conservative element that I think is right back there in the 50s. And I didn't, one thing I wanted to bring up, I didn't ask it in the interview, but it was in the 60s during the Civil Rights Movement. At the forefront of the movement, the March from Selma and all, there were priests and nuns. There are kids that are separated from their families at the border with Mexico. And I haven't heard a lot from Catholic Church or from any major religious group in the United States, not just the Catholics, that's really been strongly outspoken about it, especially from the mainstream religions that have clout. And to his credit, I mean, Father Martin, he talked about that. On the one hand, you say you're pro-life. On the other hand, capital punishment and other things that demean or relinquish life, people aren't dealing with. So
I wouldn't be surprised to find out that there were religious organizations down at the border helping.
Right, I'm sure there are.
And because there's a lot of that people aren't aware of, it doesn't make the news. But there's socially active Catholic and Jewish and Protestant organizations, especially, that are always ready to help people in need.
That's true, but getting back to what I was saying, I don't think you hear it officially. Is there a decree from the cardinal, from the bishop in the Catholic Church, from whatever the structure is in Protestant and in Jewish organizations? There's a lot of people within those organizations and a lot of clergy in those organizations that are outspoken, but I don't hear enough, and I certainly don't hear as much, or it isn't as visible as it was during the Civil Rights.
And Father Martin mentioned Daniel Berrigan when we were talking about the political differences within the church. I remember being in the anti-war movement back in the 60s and 70s, and Daniel Berrigan was a hero. Wasn't
it the Berrigan brothers?
Yeah, that's right. They were brothers. I forget who. Getting old, Dennis. It was also interesting to discover this article he wrote recently about the uprising at the Capitol and taking to task certain Catholic priests who he felt were helping to foment what ended up, being this deadly violence in Washington. He called to task in this article a particular priest who was telling people that, terrible things about Biden and saying things like you can't be a Catholic and be a Democrat, and which would come as a surprise to an awful lot of people. But he's taking a public stand that is.
I'm sure. And then the question comes up, Phil, not just with Catholicism, but all religions: should they be political, or should they stay totally out of politics? And it seems like it's been impossible to stay totally out of politics. And I mean, in Catholicism, you have these conservative priests that are what we would consider super right wing. On the other hand, you have these I forget what is it called? These revolutionary, these priests that served in Central and South America that had a totally
liberation
theology. Yeah, that was a big thing. So there's huge. So within that organization, within the Catholic Church, there's a huge distance between those two. And I have to say this: when I was in Italy, Rome, about 2 years ago, a little less than 2 years ago, I talked to a lot of people there, and the Catholic Church is very, most people are Catholic, although most people are not practicing Catholics. But there was a lot of anger amongst amongst people, not all people, but many people that I encountered, because they felt Pope Francis was too forgiving, too kind, too generous to the immigrants. And they felt they're coming and they're creating problems and all. Why is this Pope? He's causing us a lot of trouble. So that was very interesting to see up close. So I guess every religion, every group has factions, and they are battling one another. And I think certainly Father Martin represents a progressive element of the Catholic Church.
Absolutely.
And I think that's been very inspiring for those people that are progressive.
Yeah, and very good for people to know about, because I think the conservative, the right-wing Catholics and Protestants get a lot of press because they're very vocal and very passionate, and they very well organized and have been, very political. And so we have things like former Attorney General Bill Barr, who's very conservative Catholic, sort of in line with people who are conservative right-wing evangelicals, and it's an interesting phenomenon. Also,
one observation I have to say, I had again, growing up Catholic, I encountered a lot of priests in my life, and not just priests, but ministers, rabbis, and all. And some people that live, religious life like that, they don't seem like happy people. And some of them even feel, and I think especially amongst priests, maybe they didn't get married. They felt they made sacrifice. They didn't look happy. They looked angry a lot of the time.
Yeah,
and it came across that way. Father
I had
Martin
the same problem
really,
with certain rabbis.
Yeah, Father Martin really seems like a happy, balanced guy. Whether you like what he says or not, I do like what he says. But he seemed like he really was enjoying what he was doing.
What I wonder about?
Very impressive.
I wonder if anybody's ever done studies on people who go into the priesthood, who go in after having a bit of a life, like he worked for General Electric for 6 years and then went into the priesthood.
Right.
Is that different from somebody like going in right after high school, or had the calling at an early age?
Right.
What is it?
Well, you can make the argument, and I think priests would even or nuns would even make the same argument that don't jump right into this. Go experience the world. What was the Sound of Music? The nuns told the main character, go and experience life a little bit before you make this decision. And so, and I think my understanding was always that they really encouraged people to think through rather than. But I'm sure there were other people that were pushed in at 14, and I know amongst a lot of Catholic families back in the day, if they had 5 sons, they wanted one to be a priest. If they had 5 daughters, they wanted one to be a nun, and there was pressure that way. I think for those people, those are the people that are usually probably not so happy.
Yeah, that's probably true. And it's interesting because I've done all this research about the Hindu tradition, and a lot of the very famous gurus that we know wanted to be monks, wanted to take sannyasi vows, and their gurus said, no, not yet. Go to school.
Yeah, well, that was the story of Maharishi, who we studied with.
Yes.
Yeah, his teacher told him, go finish college and then come back.
Same with Yogananda.
Mm-hmm.
And then even, afterward, didn't just let him dive right in.
There's a saying in Catholicism when it comes to choosing a religious way of life, a priest or nun, and that's many are called, but few are chosen. A lot of people get the feeling this is for me, but at the end of the day, it isn't. And so that's and I think a lot wash out on the way.
Oh no!
But I think these days very few are going in that direction. So I don't know.
So tennis. You grew up Catholic. Let's talk about Father Martin's new book, Learning to Pray. Did you learn to pray as a Catholic? What did you think about prayer?
Very, very good question, Phil. Because I know. I mean, I'm trying. There were certain prayers, the Our Father, the Hail Mary, or if you're going to die, say the Confiteor Dei, the act of contrition, where you're asking. So it's sort of like that, and you do it. Somebody, then the one that was really hard on all kids that I knew was the Rosary, because it was this repetition and it was never going to end. And you kept saying the same thing over and over again. And later on, they talked about having a conversation with God. That was sort of after my time. And then it wasn't until many years later when I met some Trappist monks, when I was teaching TM at a monastery or doing the follow-up course at a monastery, that I heard about, non-conceptual prayer, which is what TM was for me, what meditation was, that, it was something totally different. And so, so no, I think, and look, there might have been priests and nuns back in the day that had great insights in this and maybe even told me, and it just went over my head. But I don't remember anything other than, oh God, you got to pray now. It's going to take forever. And it's like, you got to say, and if you don't, you feel guilty. I think it caused a lot of people to become obsessive compulsive. And it was like, yeah. So hopefully, I think the attitude toward prayer has changed dramatically. I'm looking forward to Father Martin's book to hear what he has to say about it, because obviously he's very insightful. But yeah, but in Judaism, when you didn't have a religious upbringing.
No,
but
in my house, it was like prayer seemed to be, was one of the more ridiculous things that people did. It's like, what are you praying to? Who are you talking to?
Yeah, who are you talking to? What did he say?
So I had no sense of it at all.
But if you were a Catholic kid and you were told you had to say the rosary, it was going to be like a half hour, and it was like, oh, tedious. It was just, maybe there were those kids that had extreme spiritual experiences and all, but I never encountered any.
Yeah. Well, it's not too late, Dennis.
Yeah.
Let's get off this call. I want you doing the rosary, and then you could call it japa meditation with the
and then it was something called the
melodies.
Stations of the Cross, where it was, let's say, lots of stuff.
Okay.
Next time.
Next time.
Good one. Over now.
Pray.